Welcome to part 3 of our series on preparing to address unfinished learning in math for next school year. And today we're going to talk about shifting the cognitive lift to students, even if they have so-called math gaps. And we'll do this by increasing access at the lesson level. Now, as a reminder, if you haven't had a chance to watch the other 2 pieces of the series, you can go back and do that. The first one is about annual planning and making space to address unfinished learning. And the second one is on unit planning to help you balance grade level content and prerequisite skills. So as I said earlier, this video is about planning at the lesson level and really thinking about how can we shift the cognitive lift to students, even if they have some unfinished learning to be addressed. Now, a necessary belief to have is that students can engage in grade level work, even if they have unfinished learning. So often I hear teachers say, my students can't do that. They don't know how to do X, Y, or Z. And sometimes it's true that students would be able to access the grade level content more easily if they had X, Y, or Z, but it's actually not true that students cannot engage in the grade level work because of that unfinished learning. So let's talk more about that. I have a few tips for you. And tip number 1 is to support students to build a positive math identity. And the reason for this is that when students have unfinished learning, oftentimes they have struggled in math for many years. Not always the case, but a lot of times this has happened. And so over time, a lot of students develop lower confidence in their own math ability, and they just have a more negative math identity. They don't see themselves as math people. They don't see themselves as being able to contribute to the conversation in the classroom as much as some other students. And so taking time to develop a positive math identity with students can really be one of the enabling conditions, because with that confidence comes more motivation, comes more engagement, more willingness to ask for help, and to participate in class. So one resource I have for you is this episode of my podcast. It's called the Mindful Math Podcast. And this episode with Tiana Marks was all about helping students develop a positive math identity. Tiana shares a lot of resources around the idea of math identity. So I highly recommend going and giving it a listen if this is something that you think your students would benefit from. Tip number 2 is to select problems with multiple entry points and solution pathways, and to engage students in discussion during math class. Now, I know we all know that discussion in math is very, very important, but this idea of selecting problems with multiple entry points, which means multiple ways to get into the problem, different ways to approach the problem, it's really sort of a new way of differentiating in math. Instead of splitting kids into groups based on, their level, quote unquote, using these, we call them low floor, high ceiling tasks sometimes. They're tasks and problems where no matter the student's current level of understanding, they can participate. They can start to solve the problem. Maybe they can even finish the problem. And they're using a strategy of their choice, a strategy that makes sense to them and that they have access to. And then through that discussion, what happens is that they're able to see other solution pathways, maybe some that are a bit more sophisticated or more abstract than the one they used. And that helps them to move along the progression of learning. And so one book that's really helpful for this, learning how to do this, is The 5 Practices for Orchestrating Productive Math Discussions by Margaret S. Smith and Mary K. Stein. Very popular book in math. You may already be familiar with this, but if this is something that's new to your teachers, you may consider having them do a book study with this, or pulling out a chapter or 2 or some excerpts to help them really put this into practice in a really effective way. Tip number 3 is to use instructional routines to increase access to grade level work. So instructional routines have gotten very popular in math classrooms in the last couple of years. And so some of them you may be familiar with are like Which One Doesn't Belong, or Notice and Wonder, Math Talks. There's lots of different routines, and some of them are even embedded in some of the new and aligned curricula that have come out, like illustrative mathematics, for example. But even if they're not embedded in your curriculum, these are some of my favorite go-to strategies for increasing access because some of them don't really even take any prep. If you notice that students are struggling with a problem and they aren't really sure where to start with the problem, Notice and Wonder is a great go-to instructional routine that you can use on the spot. And some of the other ones are really helpful as you're thinking through a lesson. If you are working with a teacher and the teacher anticipates that students are going to have a hard time jumping into the problem right where it is, that's a great time to think about, is there an instructional routine that we can put right in front of that problem that's going to help create an on-ramp for them? Just that little bit that they need so that they can then access the grade level problem. So I've pulled together 10 of my favorite strategies to bridge the gap to grade level math, and I created a how-to guide for each one. And if you would like to have that, all you have to do is go to www.mindfulmathcoach.com/bundle, and I will send those to you. Tip number 4 is to use formative assessment data to inform flexible small group work. So even if your teachers are teaching the class grade level content and they're really thinking through how to increase access to that grade level work, there will be students who need more support. And so thinking through, what is the formative assessment data I have? Are there exit tickets? Can the teacher circulate the room and take anecdotal notes? What are those small things that the teacher can use to identify students who may need some more support, and then pull them into a small group? And then, especially with middle school and high school students, I would really suggest giving students some choice and letting them opt into this extra support. Maybe helping them to think about their data and think about their level of understanding, and providing that opportunity to work with the teacher or maybe with another student for some more practice or some more work on something, and really to empower them to think about what do they need and what is their level of understanding so that they can start to own that and not feel like they're being pigeonholed into, being one of those students who always gets pulled, and then interpreting that as, oh, I must not be good at math and I must be a low math student, like we talked about in tip number 1 about math identity. All right, so who should do this work? It's probably the math teachers. And if they can do it as a grade level team, that would be awesome because they'd be able to share ideas and brainstorm together. The win for this is, very close to the lesson. So if they're planning a day or two ahead, this is a great time to look at that lesson plan and go through with this lens of how can I increase access to really help all my students be able to have a meaningful experience when we're doing this problem and this task, and not have some of them who can jump in and solve it right away and others who are just really confused what the problem is even asking and have no idea where to start. The why of all of this is to help students gain confidence in their math ability and to meaningfully engage in grade level work. So action step number 1 is to encourage teachers to spend time instilling mathematical mindsets and building classroom community, because both of these will lay the foundation for equitable math teaching practices. We want classrooms where students are reasoning, where students are sharing their ideas, where students are building on each other's ideas, where they're modeling with mathematics and all of these things. And so we need to be using rich tasks and also tasks that every student can do something with. And so all of the tips that I shared with you have this end in mind, where all students are able to participate, share their ideas, contribute to the class discussion, and everyone, move forward on their learning, take a step forward no matter where their starting point is. And so these mathematical mindsets and the classroom community really need to be in place, because when you have that kind of community, students are going to make mistakes. And so we need to have established that making mistakes is part of learning, and we want to have talked about growth mindset and all of those kinds of things. Action step number 2 is providing professional development and coaching to help teachers adopt equitable math teaching practices, such as facilitating math discussions. And I'll leave you with this one reminder: when we're thinking about planning at the lesson level, which is that students can engage in grade level work even if they have unfinished learning. And so I hope your students are given the chance to do that. All right, so that wraps up our 3-part series on how to prepare to address unfinished learning going into next school year and considering the learning loss that many students have had this year. And so I hope it was helpful, and please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or if you need any support.